Charles David Peterson was hired on May 16, 1930, making him the first black employee of the city of Windsor.
When my father first joined the force, he was very fair and he looked like he was white. So he had very straight hair, blue eyes, and this like white skin. And so many of the officers thought that he was white.
Peterson attended Cass Technical School in Detroit and was employed by Ford Motor Company. In 1930, he brought with him his experience as a radio technician and electrician to become a mechanic within the police department. On December 29, 1954, Peterson was transferred to Uniform Division as a constable.
I remember him driving the patrol wagon, and all the kids, when they would see him come up the street, he would stop and he would make the siren go off, and they were so excited about that.
He served in patrol until June 23, 1963, when he was transferred to Traffic Branch.
I think he made a difference. And you know, like one thing that I really appreciate is that he said, make our race proud and because you see, when we do that, then it impacts on the job as well, because we're not bringing any disrespect to his profession.
Peterson retired March 31, 1965. He died on April 5, 1983. Howard Watkins joined the Windsor Police Service on the 6th of June, 1949, as a probationary constable. He served as an officer in patrol for 8 years. On June 19, 1953, Watkins received the following notation on his service record: highly commended for his devotion to duty while off active police duty in the arrest of 2 suspects. This dedication to service and duty came as no surprise to those who knew him. It was ingrained in him from his ancestors, former slaves who escaped through the Underground Railroad. His heritage in Windsor's West End was rich and bountiful, as explained by his son David.
We were here before Canada was Canada. Our family's been in the Sandwich area for over 100, close to 200 years now. And we're like almost 7 generations. My son would be 7th generation. We have a very rich history. At first, I didn't always appreciate the history because we were just, it seemed as though at times we were, black Canadians, or just people that lived here. I can remember my father. I can remember Christmases, him playing, with us with the toys that he brought. I can remember him playing, some music on Christmas. I can remember him interacting with the family and my mom.
Well, as I understand it, my father was actually an accountant. He had gone to school and had graduated to be an accountant, and realized that nobody wanted to hire a black accountant. And he decided then that he would like to be a police officer. And he joined the police force as one of the first, and he loved his job. The one thing I know about the memory of my father was that he loved his job and the community loved him.
Well, Howard and I were very, very close. I just really couldn't believe he's such a nice guy. He was just a nice person. And of course, his wife, Laverta, I knew her very well. And we went to a lot of association seminars and whatnot. And Howard would come with me sometimes and whatnot. Then eventually he came on the board of directors.
When he passed away, I was 4. I couldn't quite understand what dying was. So when I saw him in the casket, I assumed he was asleep. And I ran up and I was shouting at him, trying to get him to wake up. The memories that are solidified in my mind about who he was and what he was have really, have really been etched into my persona and my character. It was always the idea that you are your father's son, and we have a standard. There's a standard that Watkins actually have. You will not go below that standard, and it was assumed. And it is something that I carry with me dearly, and I passed it on to my 2 boys. You are a Watkins. You are Howard Watkins' grandson. There's a standard that we live up to, and you will not go below that standard.
She said, that's your father's funeral. There are many letters that my mother kept of people giving
condolences.
and
But also talking about what kind of an impact that my father had on the community. What kind of, this was during the civil rights movement as well, right? So, it was a very tumultuous time both in Canada and the United States, and just what kind of an example.
He was a Christian gentleman, and he loved youngsters despite the fact that much of his life was spent dealing with teenagers who had broken the law. And we're sure indeed we know that if we wanted someone really to write his epitaph, it would have been, "I helped them first before I took them to the law." And that's something my mother did say often, that he was more interested in making sure that the kids had a chance before they had a record. He knew it was so important to break down those barriers, to ask for equal treatment and to expect equal treatment, and to treat people equally and to give people equal breaks when they needed it. And I think that was what made him a bridge for so many people. But that was the Watkins family. We're happy, fun, loving people. And that's something that I grew up understanding. To be a Watkins is to be a gracious, forgiving person, a person who is strong and fights, but also does it with grace and dignity.
Nobody was more dignified than Alton C. Parker. He was hired as the second black municipal employee and the first black constable for the city of Windsor. Alton's character was grounded by his strong faith in God. His lifelong devotion to First Baptist Church began as a young boy, performing a job that many others didn't want and could not perform.
Almost every office, from a Sunday school teacher to clerk to trustee. He sang in the choir, and he was deacon and filled his father's job as chair of deacons eventually. And he loved toying with autos from the time he was a young man. And indeed, he left a good paying job, a very stable job, to join the service. It was a sacrifice financially. He and my mother had quite a few heavy conversations about it, but in the end they decided it was worth it. Walking to work every day gave him a knowledge that he wouldn't have gained elsewhere. He might have to catch a basketball in the basketball court or something from the kids, and he knew them by name, knew their parents and that kind of thing. And he went as a delegate, which is something, and it says something for Windsor Police Service, how they had learned to accept him.
In 1949, 7 years after being hired, Alton Parker became a member of the executive board of the Windsor Police Association. Frida Steele explains how Parker handled himself at a 1949 provincial committee meeting in Peterborough when an inappropriate joke was told. It speaks to Alton's dignified manner.
My father, who was seated in the middle of the auditorium, stood up, draped his coat comfortably on his shoulders, looked around, and left the auditorium. Certainly the men from Windsor knew that that was not something that my father would have tolerated.
On July 28, 1951, Alton Parker was promoted to detective, making him the first black detective in Canada. Being named the first brings with it the birth of a legacy.
It was congratulations, certainly, and well-deserved, we felt. Within my memory, more accolades and fuss. Here, it was taken more or less as something well-earned and deserved.
Parker's strong faith in God enabled him to deal with the heavy psychological burden he bore.
He may have talked to my mother but I think largely he worked it out within himself. He was a man of faith, and he realized that we all have our weaknesses.
Every summer, Alton Parker treated area children to a full day of fun and treats, known by all as Uncle Al's Party.
In the mid to late 60s, my grandparents living where they were on Broadhead, which is now Alton Parker Way, having breakfast, looked out the window, and my grandmother noticed that it was the same children playing in the park day after day throughout their summer vacation. And she just thought, we should do something special for them. So when they go back to school and their classmates are talking about, oh, we went here, we went there, that they would have at least something, one thing to talk about. So they decided to throw a party. I think there were about 20-some children at that first party. And he invited some of his policing friends to come and help, and there were clowns and some magic tricks, and everybody felt very good at the end of the day. Went from 20-some children to over 1,000 children and adults over the years with pony rides and go-karts, and he always wanted all 3 levels of policing there. So the Windsor Police Services, Ontario Provincial Police, and Royal Canadian Mounted Police members would come, and it was very important to him that the children and their parents see the police as helpers, providing service to the community. They are your friends. You can trust them. You can go to them. And
they came to our school, and they informed us that they were interested in hiring minority officers at that time, black officers, and they said if they made the presentation to the whole school, and they said if anyone was interested that they should come down and apply. So I thought about it, and I talked about it with some of the adults that I knew, and they said it was a good career. That they said you'll never be rich, but it's steady employment, and it's a good employment, and you serve the community. So in '69, I put in an application for the job. I knew Alton more from a personal perspective in that we attended the same church. He attended the First Baptist Church in Windsor on Mercer Street, and that was the same church that I attended. And you always knew Alton was he was a distinguished man. He was well dressed. He had personality about him that said the man, he had character. He was a deacon in the church, and I remember as a small boy seeing him come every Sunday. He sat almost in the same pew. He helped with the offering and the administration of the church. And of course, you heard information in the community that there were black officers on the job, and I knew of Alton Parker, and Officer Ken Johnson was also a member of the First Baptist Church, and I remember him coming to church and sitting in the back pew in his uniform on Sundays when he was working. And that was impressive to a small boy to see those officers.
There were 4 black policemen, and they were all like family friends and from the community. So I had a lot of contact with them, but particularly Uncle Alton, the way he dealt with people and within the community and outside our community. And so I just felt like, I should be able to accomplish the same type of things. I remind people about Ken as the forgotten one of the first 4. Now, when I joined, Ken was the only one that was still in uniform. The attitudes that they had experienced when they came on the force, the obstacles that they had to overcome, not only in society in general, but even within our community, which is a part of the story that doesn't get told, because they had to deal with the people they lived with. Well, this is what they had to deal with back when they came on. Probably more so because it hadn't been heard of a black officer. So I had a very, very strong opinion and respect for them, knowing that, what I was going through, I'm sure they went through so much more. When you stop and you think, you're looking at 3 battles at once. You've got the general public, you've got your own community, and then you have the police force itself.
I would say there's a little bit of stress on minority officers because the eyes are on them. The eyes are on if they can do the job, if they're accepted. I mean, today it's different, but back then you were always aware that, you know, people are watching to see if I can do this job or if I'm going to mess up in some regard. So you always had that, you carry that little extra burden with you. And the other thing a burden that I think minority officers carry is that sometimes you feel like it's just me. I mean, there's 300 others and then there's me. And that carries a little weight too on stress and pressure that, boy, if I screw up, it's not gonna look good because I'm the only guy here, you know. And that load is hard for us to bear.